The peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. Let's say opening prayer. Father Yahweh, this is Kwanzaa Faniel, seat of the last days witnesses, Israel Hawkins, your son, our high priest, Yeshua Messiah, along with the great men of this class on this preparation day as we approach the Sabbath, giving you thanks, Father, for the understanding and the protection and the calling that you've given to us, this great opportunity to accept the teachings of the last days witness and to obey them and to become a permanent part of your kingdom forever, this magnificent position that you are offering to us that we cannot comprehend. We do thank you greatly for this and pray, Father, to never lose sight of that this needs to be the number one thing in our lives and to dedicate ourselves fully to it and to not miss this boat. We thank you for all things in Yeshua Messiah's name. Hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. Okay, we're going to be in the 11th book of Israel, He Who Rules as Yahweh, the End of the Ages, Part 2. You can be seated. And we're going to start. I've kind of got a little organizational problem here. I can see why Pastor wanted the bigger lectern, but it's almost like you need an assistant. But we'll go to page 21, which is chapter 3. I believe that's where we're starting. I've got, let me just make sure I get my pages right. Yeah, we're going to start on page 21, and we're going to start, I think we'll start on verse 10. We might as well start on verse 10. So someone told me the other day, they were driving down the road the other day. Now this kind of rich man, he's a guy that I do business with, but he said he saw this man out in front yard eating grass. So he told his chauffeur to turn around and go back, and he asked the guy, he says, why are you eating grass? And he said, I don't have any food. And he said, well, get in your car, get in my car, and I'll take you and feed you. And he said, well, I got my family here too. Well, where are they? They're out in the backyard. The grass is more plentiful back there. So he said, well, get them all, get them in my limousine. So they were driving down the road. This guy said he was thankful, and this guy was going to take his family and feed them. And he said, well, actually, he says, my grass is greener in my backyard anyway, and it needs mowing. Well, that shows the love, the sort of love that they're today's sort of love. And of course, it's the taking advantage of someone, the loving someone for something that you can get in return, which is really the opposite of what the House of Yahweh teaches. And it's really the root of all the problems that you see in the world today. It's kind of this little story that Pastor is talking about. But let's go to verse 13. We'll go down to verse 13. Unemployment now has reached Abelin. They say they thought we'd get through this. Well, the blessings came to Abelin because I came to Abelin. Remember what Pastor said? He came here in 1967, and there were rows and rows of empty houses. There was nothing here. And Abelin, when you think of it, it almost has no reason to be here except for the House of Yahweh. It's in the middle of nowhere, and there's nothing particularly appealing about it. I find it interesting that there's hundreds of thousands of people that visit here as tourists every year. I'm not even exactly sure what it is they're looking at, but they're not all coming here, but they're coming to look at something. But what was interesting is Pastor mentioned the other day, and I saw this, there's been this underlying major news story that's not covered in the news. And you see it a little bit in the local news. You see little hints of it, like a major multinational oil company is going to move to the Abelin area. And you see that even some of these people like the Vice President Dick Cheney and his company are getting involved, and they're going to take over the old Sam's Club building. And what's going on is an energy independence revolution. That's a kind of a quiet revolution. And I read this story, and it was in a industrial magazine, and it was saying how no one's even talking about it in the mainstream news, but that the oil imports for the United States are down something like 40% in like the last 5 years alone. It's a huge shift in oil imports that is, they're saying, going to have major geopolitical implications. And yet, to look at the world situation today, you would think, what geopolitical implications? You might think they would stop fighting over war in Iraq and Iran and Syria and Libya, but they're not really doing that. But what's occurring is that the fracking and the windmills and the energy efficient cars, they've got cars now that I think I saw an advertisement for one. It was this little teeny car, electric car that you're supposed to drive on the road. If you ever seen an accident these teeny cars get in, it'll be a 3-car accident, and the teeny car is between the other 2 cars with the occupants, and it's about 4 inches wide. It's not a funny thing if you get in a car accident with one of these little teeny cars. I think you basically get mushed into a little hamburger patty literally, but they were talking about this, like, how is this occurring, and what is it about, and what's the purpose? And I was noticing this myself, this story, and how it's not getting much coverage, because it's almost the end of the energy problem in the world. That's really what it kind of represents. And you even see it a little bit with gas prices going down. I'm not saying it is the end of the energy problem, but it's at 40% in 5 years reduction in oil imports to the United States. Well, Pastor covered it perfectly, because it's this inexplicable thing out there, and it does involve Abelin. And what they're doing is they are preparing for the nuclear wars in the Middle East, when they're going to nuke the oil fields, and it's going to then require that there be another source of oil in order for them to maintain their war machinery, and in order for them to maintain stability in the world. They're still going to have stability, or they won't be able to take over the world, so they need a certain degree of that. But that is just one of these little things that Pastor notices in the news and can explain and can show exactly what it means, and the world has no idea what's going on. But this is this preparation for this war that they are actually preparing for, and the ones that are doing it are I think they're just so smart, to have come up with this plan for getting the oil ready for when the war starts. This is a brilliant. What you're seeing is a brilliant military move being executed. Let's skip ahead real quick to verse 63. I'm going to skip back and forth a little bit in this lesson to make a few points here in a particular order. But verse 63 on page 26, they're saying now, the ex-CIA agent and his crew, no longer with the CIA, but were with them for years. I don't have the article with me, but they're saying now that they suspect that the big wars are going to start in September of this year. I'm thinking you better start overcoming the little things, do some fasting, praying, humble yourselves, and see what a blessing it is to be told what to do. And this is something that the world promotes against. They want to promote that you shouldn't be told what to do. To being told what to do is a bad thing. Meanwhile, they're telling everyone what to do, but they do it in a subtle way. That Yahweh has actually went to the trouble to bring forth a house that can tell you what to do to stay in contact with Him. And this is something you can easily put out of your mind, the reality of the inevitability of nuclear war. There was just a story just today about how, let me see if I can find that real quick. The Russians are deploying this year a brand new missile that's better and bigger and faster than anything else that's been produced. And this nuclear bomb, it says, let me see how this works. It says last year, Russian officials explained the new missile's fuel and anti-missile defense capabilities in an interview with Moscovy Komsomolets. The strategic nuclear weapons specialist said the high-tech fuel, and this is a special fuel that they're putting in this new missile, allows for the reduction of the working time of the engine during the boost phase of flight, when the missile is most vulnerable to detection by defensive means. As a result, we achieve the most complex part of the rocket boost so fast that the enemy does not have time to calculate its trajectory and therefore cannot destroy it, the official said. That is, we can say that our ability to overcome missile defense will be significantly increased. And this is a new missile that's going to hold 10 multiple entry vehicles, so that it can deliver, each one of those 10 can deliver several more warheads, so they can carpet bomb cities with nuclear weapons. And this is the desire to level these nuclear weapons. And this story just came out May 1st. So this goes right along with what Pastor is saying about this imminent nuclear war that is about to begin. And if you can see this in even the news. I was noticing this recently. I watch the news, or I like to call it the pharmaceutical hour. And it's the pharmaceutical hour, and as they take every now and then, they'll take a little break to give you some news. And I noticed I'm not kidding, it's really amazing. Or you can call it the side effect hour, whichever. It's just endless lists of side effects. And they sell some trucks. I think the truck commercials are local, but the national commercials are the pharmaceuticals, so that's where the big money is. And I've noticed, and I pointed this out, I think I mentioned this in one of the news articles recently, is the legalese that the newscasters use when describing the situations in the areas where it's unstable in that fourth part of the earth in and around the great river Euphrates. They're constantly using these terms like evidence and culpability and credibility and scientific experts and all of this kind of thing. And you'll notice it now that I've mentioned it to you. It took me a while to notice it. They've been using these terms for a long time. But what they're doing is they're actually making a case, and they're making a case for this nuclear war that Pastor talks about the CIA agent knowing about, the Catholic Intelligence Agency. And what they're doing is, in making this case, you can see that there's someone that needs to make a decision, because they wouldn't be making a case if there didn't need to be a decision made by someone. You wouldn't have to convince someone if there was no need to do the convincing. They could spend their time selling something else. But they're selling this because someone needs to come down with a decision, and it's in a legal setting. So what you're seeing is an appeal to a court of some kind to come down with a judgment that nuclear war needs to start. And this is what you're seeing in this. These people, it's like years ago, these people that work in the government kind of know what's going on a lot more than they're letting on. Because I used to deal with a little bit of government contracting, and they would tell you secrets they were not supposed to tell you. And I mean, it fits right along with what Pastor is talking about. But the point of this is that this judgment that they're seeking is not, it's not the judgment of Yahweh. It's like the verdict in a jury. If you see a jury making a verdict, you'll have a trial on court, and they have some trials on TV now, and they'll say the jury has now gone in to discuss the verdict, and then they'll come out with the verdict, and they'll say they have a verdict. The jury has a verdict. So they have a judgment, they have a decision, and, well, the question is, well, whose verdict is it? Is it the defendant's verdict, or is it the jury's verdict? Because it's a possessive position they're stating here. The jury has a verdict. Well, whose verdict is it? And it's kind of along the lines of this thing when Yahweh talks about the judgment of man. That the judgment of man is coming, and that's what this CIA agent is talking about. It's not Yahweh that is saying that man should be nuked. In fact, Yahweh is saying what Israel Hawkins is saying. He's saying, throw away your weapons. Come to the house of Yahweh. You should not be nuked. No one should be nuked. So Yahweh's judgment, don't get Yahweh's judgment mixed up with man's judgment. And it's easy to do this because the two are spoken of together in Scripture. It's almost like a trick on purpose. Because it'll say man is... I couldn't find the scripture. I had such a short time to prepare for today's class. I was looking, I'm online, I'm looking for God's judgment, wrath of God, and I couldn't find what I was looking for. But the point is, it'll say something like, for Yahweh's judgment has come. And it'll be, whoa, Yahweh's judgment has come. And in the King James, it'll be, his wrath has come. And so you automatically think, well, that's it. Yahweh has decided that these people should be nuked, and now they're going to get it. But no, it's making the tie between the last day's message of the house of Yahweh being at the same time as the judgment of man. And that judgment of man is a judgment by man, on man, against man. It's the verdict of the jury against the jury, and it's going to be sentencing the jury. It's all man. This whole judgment that you're about to see is man all around. From decision, the investigation, the interpretation of the evidence, everything about this nuclear war is man. Yahweh's judgment doesn't enter into it at all, except to say, go ahead. You just do what you want to do. It's an all-man judgment. Yahweh's judgment is, you're sitting right here. This is how Yahweh fixes the problems of the world. It's non-violent. No one here is having their limbs torn off. We're not blowing anyone to smithereens. We're not converting anyone to plasma. We're not taking and converting you to a pile of carbon. We're teaching you Yahweh's laws and converting you to the keeping of those laws and teaching you to love your neighbor as yourself. That's Yahweh's judgment. Man's judgment is, and watch this as you see it in the news as they make this appeal, man's judgment is, to fix this problem, we need to drop a nuke. That's what his judgment is. That is the judgment of man. And we're going to see this whole thing unfold because it's important that you understand how a person gets to the position of thinking that this is correct. It's important that you realize how it is a person gets to the position in their head of thinking that this is correct, because they do. Let's go to verse 54. Verse 54 on page 25. Why do they think this is correct? They do. They do think this is correct. They have it planned. It's such a big, giant plan, it's actually affecting the economy of Abelin and driving our unemployment down. Abelin itself is preparing for this nuclear war by being a part of the preparation of the energy needs that it's going to have and the needs of the energy that it's going to need afterward. This is a huge plan that's unfolding, and no one's even talking about it. They're just giving us little hints and little appeals that's necessary to convince the jury, and the people are not the jury. The people aren't making this decision. These appeals are not being made to the average person watching the news who has a cholesterol problem. They're actually aiming this material at people who speak legalese. And that's why they're talking legalese. And so they're talking to the leaders of the world, most of whom are lawyers. And this is why you see the legalese in the language. They're not going to waste their time talking to the average person. They have the attention of the world leaders, and they're going to use that. Verse 54, one of the deteriorations of that mind is to put extreme hatred in that mind, to destroy certain cells of the mind. So this is one of the ways of weakening the nations, putting hatred there. And this is what we've seen even with the House of Yahweh. And the pastor goes on and he talks about, they say there's these Jews down there, and they have this girl went down there and they make dog food, and she disappeared. It's like these people, they go on and they talk about the House of Yahweh being a prison camp. And that we're all held hostage and we're slaves. And I mean, the position is totally absurd. But people sit there really and they go, oh wow, that's a cult and they're slaves and they can't get out. We can't do anything about, there's laws of the land and there's sheriffs and there's police department, but no one could do anything about these poor people that just can't get out behind this fence that's too tall to get over. And I was thinking, I had a dream. I was thinking I had a dream of a TV show of my own, and I would have these people, I would be a guest host. And I'd have them on, and I'd ask my questions. I wouldn't let people, these dinglings that have these shows ask the questions, because I would ask, because you got this woman, and she's not a small woman, and she's sitting there in a chair, and I was thinking, if it's such a prison camp and they have tall fences, how did you get out? I had a little better language than that, but I had to do with a fat something, but I didn't. That was my dream. It was kind of a nightmare, but it's like, how did you get out anyway? I mean, what did you? If you're the fastest one in there, so supposedly we have this big prison camp, and we have this 250-pound woman, and she jumped the 11-foot fence. She got out, and she didn't manage to call the police and have them come back and free the other slaves. But it works, believe it or not. People actually believe we actually have slaves in the House of Yahweh, and they're actually held behind brick walls or something like this. But it's of course, it's ridiculous. But this is what is spoken of in verse 54. One of the deteriorations of that mind is to put extreme hatred in that mind. And then you cannot think straight anymore. You hate the House of Yahweh, so you actually do believe that we're holding hostages. But it's not, well, if you would explain to them, well, why can't the police get them out? Well, it's not that way. It's you've got them under a spell. We've got them under some kind of a spell. Meantime, they're watching 10 hours of TV that's being conducted by experts in putting spells on people. The multi-million-dollar psychoanalysts are pumping information into their head all the time, and yet Israel Hawkins is somehow better than that at them than they are. The House of Yahweh does not use any type of deception or psychological trick on anyone. We're the only ones that don't. We simply speak the truth. The only time you need to use these deceptive tactics is when you're telling a lie. That's when you need to use those tactics. And so when we say the seventh day is the Sabbath, that's the truth, and very few people believe it. The world needs deception to convince them that the first day is the Sabbath. And that's the difference. They're the ones under the spell. So one of the deteriorations of the mind is to put extreme hatred in that mind. The popes used to say, Malachi Martin said that, but also the histories of the Crusades said they would put propaganda out against a certain group who was keeping Yahweh's laws, these Galileans. Now, if you notice, the propaganda, a lot of it came from CPS, Child Protective Services, and I mentioned this in previous classes, but they are under investigation for felony fabrication of evidence, witness tampering, and this is all in the newspapers, very little coverage. And this is a teeny little town with a small little organization called CPS with a large percentage of its workers under investigation for criminal evidence tampering involving the safety of children, and not to help the safety of that child, but to cover up the fact that they allowed a child to be murdered or killed, or she died. She could have, I'm not sure exactly how she died, but she died by some kind of abuse. But the point is that they are giving this story very little coverage. And just a month or two ago, one of the 4 that was put on paid leave, she was put on paid leave. They're getting full pay for this job, but she doesn't have to work. She's getting full pay. She resigned because she wanted to do something else. You can do something else because you're getting paid. You're getting paid to stay away. Then the other one was fired. So they found something out that was so serious that they figured if we don't fire her, we're going to get in trouble. That's how bad it is. If we don't fire her, it's not that they fired her because she should have been fired. None of this, there's no righteousness in any of their decisions. It's all an angle, it's all, a duck, a cover, it's all of that. But they figured if we don't fire her, we're going to get in trouble. So that's how bad it is. And the news media is almost not covering this at all. It's almost not covering this at all. But he showed how extreme it was when the Apostle Shaul, he showed how extreme it was. And this is the hate that gets into their minds when he told about his own life doing the will of the priests, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Essenes, where he would get letters to kill, authority, a license to murder, a license to kill, and he would hunt these people down. They would form a colony someplace to where they thought they were safe, and they would practice the laws of Yahweh. And this is, of course, what we see in the people today that are going against the house of Yahweh is this same exact character. And it's like everything else the house of Yahweh says. Many people just simply won't believe it until they see it. Okay, they won't believe it until they see it. And then when they see it, and a lot of times when people, because other people experience these things besides us, but when they see it, it's such a shock to their system that you'll hear a phrase and they'll say, I felt like I was in a movie. Okay, if you've ever heard that phrase, I felt like I was in a movie. I've analyzed that saying because I've had that feeling myself. and it's like, what it is it's something that is so unbelievable to you that it could only exist in fiction. And then when you see it, your mind has to put it somewhere, and so it puts it in the place of fiction or a movie. And so you get that feeling that you're in fiction. And this is what occurs to people when they get attacked by the Catholic Church, because the thought is that these people have good intentions. And then when reality hits, you realize they don't. So the mind has to do something with this, and this is what it does. It puts it into the place of fiction. Now, I want to get your mind on this. Pastor was warning about the nuclear bomb. I think it was in verse 63. And he says, you better do some fasting and praying and humble yourself and see what a blessing it is to be told what to do. And that you need to do this fast. Because this is something I've studied wars a little bit, some of the wars, because I was trying to figure out what is this war going to be like. Because it's not like anything we can really fully imagine, because very few of us have experienced war, and nothing like the war that we're about to experience, and from the position that we're going to be experiencing it. But there was in World War II, there was something called the Siege of Leningrad, and it kind of illustrates the suddenness of war and its effect on the people that are subject to it, and almost the inability to deal with it if someone is not prepared in advance, heavily prepared in advance. Because people always, even in Germany before the war started, believe it or not, Germany was a whole country of Christians. They weren't Druids or pagans or anything like this. They were actually Christians, and they celebrated Christmas, and they were just becoming, they were having a little bit of trouble with their economy because of the taxes, because of World War I, but they were still emerging from that, and the technology was taking off, and so they would write diaries about things like, we just got a refrigerator, and we're thinking of getting a car, and life is great, we got an end table, and they were talking about just everyday things, but modern things, and how they were just getting them phonographs, and they didn't like the idea that they might be going to war. They really didn't like this, because Hitler was pushing it, and some other people were pushing it, but the average population was kind of satisfied with life. It was kind of getting positive. But when the war started, they did something, and it was in Russia, and they seized this city called Leningrad, and there was a little girl there that was 6 years old, and she had a diary. And it got to the point where you couldn't even buy fuel for heat. In Leningrad, you needed fuel. I mean, the climate is very cold. And so she had to burn her diary. And they used that for, and they had to eat cats, and they had to do things like this. But her sister, her older sister, gave her diary so that she could continue the diary. Now, this is a 6-year-old girl, and her name is Tatiana Nikolaevna Savika. And she was 6 years old. And it's, I think there's a song written about her, but it says she kind of represents the troubles of the world in this one girl's story. But it also illustrates what will occur to people if they are not heeding the warning of the House of Yahweh. Because the nuclear war and its effects are going to be sudden. And they're going to be vicious. And everyone's going to think they're in a movie. They're not going to believe it's occurring around them. They're going to say, I can't believe this is occurring. But this family who was working in Leningrad was overtaken by the same type of thing that we're going to be overtaken if we don't heed the warning of the House of Yahweh now. Right now. Because it could be 1 minute from now the war starts right now. It could be tomorrow. But there's no time to prepare unless you start now. But the contents of her diary, I'm going to read this whole diary. I think we have time. I'm going to read the whole diary. Okay, now this is her diary. She's a 6-year-old girl. And this is the beginning of the siege of Leningrad, which was a sudden thing that none of them were anticipating. Here's her diary. Zenya died on December 28th at 12 p.m., 1941. Grandma died on January 25th, 3 p.m., 1942. Lika died on March 5th at 5 a.m., 1942. Uncle Vesha died on April 13th at 2 after midnight, 1942. Uncle Lisha on May 10th at 4 p.m., 1942. Mother on May 13th at 7:30 a.m., 1942. Sevekyas died. Everyone died. Only Tanya was left. That was the whole diary. Because she didn't want to waste any paper. She only put the important parts in her diary. But these people could do nothing about their situation because it was too late. Once the war starts, the little bit of freedom that people have in the world, even today, and even then, ends. There's no more going anywhere you want to go, period. There's no more buying anything you want to buy, period. There's no more using your iPhone, your cell phone, your computer. It's all off. And then you get the series. You might as well just take out a diary, a sheet of paper, if you have any left after heating your house, and just start jotting down the names of your family members and the dates they die. Because that's what's going to occur if you don't heed the warning of the House of Yahweh and if you don't do it today. Now let's go to verse 89. Remember that Yahweh founded Ephesians. Remember that Yahweh founded this way. He established it. He established the house of Yahweh. And look at Ephesians 2:19. Therefore you are no longer Gentiles. You are no longer heathen. Is that the word that should have been? But you could translate it Gentiles. Strangers to the faith. Strangers to the faith. Now, if you know, I spent a year trying to explain that Gentiles is a false word. Race is a false word. It's lying. It's a lie. It was meant to deceive. It was meant to deceive, and it was meant to oppress. And Pastor mentioned recently about lawyers having their place in the lake of fire. And I know many of you probably know what I was thinking. At the time, I was thinking, I hope he doesn't mean pretend lawyers. But I don't think he did, because we're going to still need pretend lawyers in the house, because we're going to have to do these little skits about lawyers. But they are really the scribes. Race is an invention so that they can promote racism, but racism is a Catholic doctrine. And the law to end racism, you cannot. Even though there's no races, there still is racism. And what it is it's a discrimination based on someone's physical characteristics, usually skin color. But you will not stop racism, and this has been proven by just saying, "Don't be a racist." That won't stop racism, because racism is comprised of a multitude of sins, all working together, and it's the whole law really, but you could focus in on several in particular that would have to be worked out of a person. And by sins, I mean the action of the sin and the desire to sin. Racism is kind of a combination of sins and desires to sin that cannot be overcome by simply saying you should not be a racist. That just won't end it. In fact, it's kind of like trying to. It's the notion of you can't change is one of the teachings of the Christian religion, and this is what you see in people going to prison for, because they've been taught that people can't change, and it's also along the lines of. I don't even know that most racists that I've known actually believe that a person of another color is inferior to them. But they want to take that as an opportunity to gain something from that person. And this is what you see with lawyers. You'll see lawyers who know perfectly well that we are not what they accuse us of being, and yet they will go on television and try to stir up racial and religious hatred against us so that they can make some money. And this is why part of the reason why the lawyers have their place in the lake of fire. And it's like this idea that they have now where they talk about hate crimes. And they want to make it a hate crime to, for example, beat up a homosexual. If you beat up a homosexual, that's a hate crime. Or if you beat up a black man and you're white, that's a hate crime. And I've seen people joke about this, and they say, well, isn't beating up someone a hate crime in the first place? And it is. Any sin is a hate crime. You can think of it that way. Any sin is a hate crime. But why would they want to make this distinction and call these squabbles that involve differences in people a hate crime? It's because they want to cover up the source of hate. Because the hate crime is really on the part of the government that promotes this. And the way that they do it is they it's like the Civil Rights Act. If you look at the Civil Rights Act, it was originally called the Ku Klux Klan Act. That's what originally started. And the reason, and if you look at that law, it's almost exclusively a cause of action against the government. It's a series of lawsuits that you can mount against the government, which, by the way, are completely ignored. If someone mounts a civil rights lawsuit today, they just get laughed out of court. I don't think anyone ever succeeds in those, ever. They pretend they have civil rights, they set up this big law, and no one ever succeeds at these suits anymore. One time I read one federal court's docket for 2 years, and there was probably 20, 30, maybe 40 civil rights cases. Every one of them was summarily dismissed, and they were valid. But the reason that act was called the Ku Klux Klan Act And the reason that it goes against government is because what the government would do, the Ku Klux Klan would hang a man because he was black, and then the government prosecutor would stop the prosecution of the man that did the hanging. And so they'd go do it again. Because hanging people is against the law. It's always been against the law in this country. But the government would get in and they would stop it. And so they would stop the prosecution, they would tamper with the witnesses, they would threaten the witnesses, and they would make sure that the person who hanged the black man did not get prosecuted for murder. And so you come up with the Ku Klux Klan Act. The Ku Klux Klan was getting all the powerful offices in government, in the state positions in particular, and that was why the federal government came in this. And so you see, the more you get involved in law, and you can even see it with lawyers that would tend to speak against the House of Yahweh, it's like, we don't hate a religious belief. We just hate this little group, this little dirty group over here. See, and that's the way the Germans viewed the Jews. You know, in Hitler Germany, Hitler wasn't Hitler. He was like Bill Clinton or something. You know, he hadn't yet achieved that status of being this really horrible man. He was just a politician. It's the same thing with the Jews. They weren't like they are today. They were these little, in their minds, dirty immigrants. So what they weren't discriminating against them because they were Jewish, they were discriminating against them because they were cheap. They were dishonest. See, and this is what they do. They try to tag character traits. The people that hate the House of Yahweh because of our religious belief don't even know what our religious belief is. They hate us because the news media, which is totally run by lawyers, make sure that they put the programming on that makes the people hate us, and you cannot overcome that. You cannot overcome that with the tiny voice that we have right now at this time because of the amount of influence that they have. And so this is the racism is, and the invention of races is a legal invention by the lawyers to allow them to take advantage of people and to oppress them further. And they use it in the courts, and they use it today. And now, if we were to go on 50 years from now and the House of Yahweh were to come and gone, which isn't going to occur, but let's say if that was to occur, the news would talk about how horrible a thing it was that they spoke against the House of Yahweh back then. And they would be, you know, that was a terrible discrimination. I'm glad we don't do that nowadays. And that's what they would do. But now we're here and now, and they hate us, and they're not going to even pretend that this is discrimination. Another thing, if you notice too, in the news, they don't cover like they used to. They used to cover the Hitler situation every year or so, where they would talk about Hitler. I don't know what day it was. I don't know if it had something to do with World War II, and they would say, you know, let's not forget. If we don't learn history, we'll repeat it. They don't even do that anymore. They don't even do that on the news. They never bring that stuff up anymore. So they've even forgotten to tell us to not forget. They just told us don't forget. They didn't tell us what the lesson was we needed to learn, but now they're not even telling us to not forget. And the reason I think a lot of it is because I think a lot of them recognize they kind of like Hitler. You know, I think they see the similarity there. And so it's like, we better not bring that one up because I think we're a little bit like him. Now let's go to verse 90. But you are no longer strangers to this promise. Therefore, you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the house of Yahweh, members of the house of Yahweh, and are built upon the foundation that Yahweh founded in Isaiah. That is, he answers to us, you are built on a foundation that Yahweh laid of the apostles and prophets, Yeshua himself being the cornerstone. I spent several sermons on that too, showing how this all came together that was prophesied, with Yeshua being the sinless one and becoming the chief cornerstone of the last days house of Yahweh, with Yeshua as high priest. It's all coming together, and this is the last day's work of the messenger that Isaiah knew of and was answering our questions in advance, in whom the whole house, being fitly joined by Yahweh, and we can see that in operation right before our eyes. grows into the holy house of Yahweh. It didn't start that way, but that's what it's growing into, the perfect people inside the house of Yahweh. And then this is, of course, in order to understand this or see the significance of what's going on, you have to believe in the scriptures themselves. You're a fool if you don't believe all that the prophets have spoken, which shows that you've been fooled. You're a deceived one. You've been deceived if you don't believe all that the prophets have spoken. And Pastor, I think a little recently he was mentioning evolution and this kind of, because when you talk to people in the world, if you talk to them at all, they have zero familiarity with the Bible. I don't think that was true 50 years ago. Even when I was growing up, some people had a teeny bit of familiarity with the Bible. But this doctrine of evolution, I was reading something on Wikipedia, and it talked about the 7 wonders of the world. And I was wondering, what are those? What are the 7 wonders of the world? Because Yahweh talks about, mankind is wonderfully made. And so I was looking up the wonders of the world, and it talked about the pyramid. And there's only one left. They're all God-worshipping things, but there's only the pyramid left. And it was talking about how the pyramid was made. I think they said something like 3,500 BCE. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting, because that's kind of along the lines of a few hundred years after mankind being placed on the earth. And it said in there that what was remarkable was it was shortly after the invention of the wheel. And I was thinking, when was the wheel invented? If it was shortly after, is the wheel really an invention? And I think that would be kind of a tough one in court, hosing this round thing, It's like, I thought of it. No, you'd be arguing over who thought of it first. But it classified the wheel as an invention. And so they used the wheel to get these big blocks up this giant pyramid. And so that was what was so amazing about it. So I said, well, if the wheel was just invented, when do they say man evolved? Because if the wheel was invented around 4000 BCE, which is coincidentally when Yahweh says man was placed, then how long did mankind go without this wheel invention? Because, I don't know, but necessity is the mother of invention, and I looked up, and I know necessity personally, but so I looked up and they said mankind evolved 200,000 years ago. So what do you mean? Are you telling me that mankind... No, wait, you're a religious nut. Don't even ask these questions. Are you telling me that mankind went 195,000 years without the wheel? They're not going to answer. No, we're not. Are you talking about Neanderthals? Or is it Neanderthals? No, we're talking about man. No, you mean the full Homo sapiens. Then we get into that topic again. But no, but he said, no, that's... Mankind was us 200,000 years ago. We were completely fully evolved. We were just like we are today. 200,000, the short one would be 80,000. Okay, so they went 75,000 years without, picking berries and noticing the berry rolling down the hill and saying, hey, I got an idea for a wheel. Well, they couldn't think of it because they didn't have a language, so they couldn't say it. I think I'd start drawing. Well, you have to invent the pen. But so they go 80,000 years, 200,000 years without the wheel, and it's like, this is Pastor mentioned this before, this idea of the caveman, and it's like, there's where the caveman fits in, because he's just like you and me. He's fully genetically just like us, but for some reason he just can't think, and he can't think of even simple things. So for 195,000 years, the caveman, you get a caveman, you got to have the cave woman, right? That's... Then you have little cave children, and you've got the cave, and of course they're multiplying. In 200,000 years there'd be like trillions of them, but so we'll keep it to about 10 for 200,000 years. And you got a caveman, you got the cave woman, you got the little cave children, you got the cave living room, and of course you've got the big stone sofa, right? And since you've got the cave woman, you've got the need to redecorate once in a while. And the big stone sofa is going to have to be moved over here and over there once in a while. And so there you've got the need for a wheel. But no, they went 200,000 years without anyone thinking of a wheel. And then I thought, wow. And they said, and this was shortly after the institution of the first city in 4000 BCE. And I thought, you mean they went 195,000 years without even having a city. But they know this. They know this is the first city. The first city was in Iraq, and it was in 4000 BCE, and apparently they set up this city, and then they came up with the wheel, and then they decided to build this pyramid. But this was all after living in these caves for 200,000 years, barely multiplying, just keeping it about 10 people, not noticing the berry rolling down the hill and saying, hey, I got an idea for a wheel, not redecorating their living room, not moving the furniture around, never coming up with the need for a wheel. The whole idea is ridiculous. But what allows people to believe that is the concept of a caveman. Okay, that's what allows people to believe that. Well, of course, we were cavemen. End of argument. Let's not even discuss this anymore. You're a religious nut for not believing in evolution. You know, it's really... That is where you stand when you don't believe the house of Yahweh. That is the crazy thinking of verse 54. One of the deteriorations is of the mind, is to put extreme hatred in that mind. And once you have extreme hatred, you can no longer see that the seventh day is the Sabbath. Okay, you see this book on your coffee table? What is it? It's the Bible. Have you ever read it? No, not really. I probably should. Have you ever read it? No, I probably should. What do you think is in there? What do you think's in the Bible? And they'll probably come up with things like a rolling stone gathers no moss. They're not going to know, but at some point you could probably get them to admit that what they think is in there is salvation. They're right. We tell them what it says, and we offer that salvation. But you can go along and you can live your life believing that mankind went for 200,000 years without a city. And you know what starts a city? You know, you can just have a dog barking. All of a sudden you got a neighbor over there and they're like, you know, we need a police department. And it's like, well, we need, I got these children here. I got to go out hunting. Who's going to take care of these children? 200,000 years they didn't do it. For 200,000 years they didn't even come up with a little caster for their couch. Nothing. Never mind a car, never mind a boat, a plane, nothing. They didn't come up with writing. Zippo. But they were cavemen. So don't think any further. 200,000 years. That was one of the wonders of the universe. So to me, what a wonder is that pyramid being that old wouldn't make them say, wait a minute, maybe that's when man started. We go right back to this point, boom, and there it is. Everything starts all at once. Isn't that amazing? So let's go to verse 94. In verse 22, and in him you are also being built together to become the house of Yahweh through the laws, or as it's translated, spirit. Now remember, spirit, Yachanan 6:63. These words, the laws of the spirit that changes your heart and mind, making you become the house of Yahweh. It's the words, listening to them. And this is what they don't want. They don't want the people to listen to our words, and so they slander us. They hate us because we don't molest children. They hate us because we don't molest children. I'm telling you, that's exactly what the problem is. And for the average Joe on the street, it's a different reasons. But for the ones in charge, for the ones who are kind of moving all this money and all this information and telling all these things, it's because we don't molest children. That's the problem. And that is what CPS is in trouble for. Not for protecting, but for hiding. Because, I've always thought, if I was a child molester, I think the first thing you'd want to do is if you had an organization that did child abuse, that actually was instituted for that purpose, like say the Catholic Church, one of the things you'd want to do is you'd want to get control of the legal system, because then you could deflect all efforts. It's like the children, inevitably the children will say, they'll come out like, we see these news stories where there's been like 50,000 people, children molested in Canada, and they'll say, well, why wasn't this ever brought up? 50 is some ridiculous number. Why wasn't this ever brought up? Just one priest molested 1,000. Well, the prosecutor just didn't think there was enough evidence. He just got the testimony of a child, and the mothers they were a little afraid. So you got 50,000. Just look at these numbers, because these are real numbers. And no one said, he did what? Like all mothers normally would do. Well, I'm going to the police, and won't even sit still until this problem is solved. No, they were able to do it because they had positions of power. They had positions of power where they could threaten these people, their very livelihoods, and throw them in jail for the rest of their lives. That's why they didn't talk. That's why they didn't talk. You don't have a priest who can molest children unless you have a judge that allows that priest to molest children. So you got the two systems all working together, and that's what you see with the Masonic system that you see, the videos that we were showing you about the Masonry. It's this religious system that has worked its way into the governments of the world and controls key positions. And whenever they lose one, they put all their effort into replacing it, to getting rid of the person that's a problem. They can put up with a little bit of sloppiness. They can put up with a little bit of rebellion and a little bit of someone that's not quite fully going along with them. But overall, they just try to fill all the places that they can, because no one else is doing that. No one else has even thought of that. So it's not like they have any competition. They're kind of snickering about the whole thing. It's kind of so easy for them. Now, verse 8, but not anymore, because we're exposing them. You know, if you listen to the House of Yahweh, and you haven't fully been convinced that this is the place, or that there is a place even, you should at least be convinced that the Catholic Church is not. You should at least be convinced that the Catholic Church is not. I mean, I think that should be patently obvious to anyone. You're not ready to make the full... So stop funding them. Stop giving them any money. It's the money is what they're able to do and perpetrate these crimes against people. That's how they do it. It's with the money that they have. All of these people moved into all these key positions, Mason after Mason, Catholic after Catholic, Jesuit after Jesuit, in these key positions, making these little teeny decisions that no one even notices, taking over the world, converting it to sodomy. And they just had a football player that came out, like, this is a story. You got the big scandal going on in CPS, a major scandal, an actual state agency coming against its own people, fabricating evidence, stealing the children, and then selling the children. The CPS actually sells the children. And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, no, what? No way. And if you found out, you'd say, this is a movie. It isn't like they put them on Facebook and they say, we've got a 10-year-old child here, or eBay, and, CPS, 10,000 or best offer. And they don't do it that way. They sell the children to the psychologists and to the lawyers, because each child is worth so much. And it's in the thousands. It's not a small amount. You can buy a boat with it. It's like you can go fishing. You can if you steal one child from some poor family that probably wouldn't have treated the child right anyway, you can go on a cruise to Greece. Okay, so you get the lawyer there, and she says, yeah, and Your Honor, I want to appoint John Smith to be the psychiatric counselor, and we're going to need an ad litem. Oh yeah, okay, there's another 10,000 from the state for the ad litem. She's going to take care of the child's legal needs. And then we're going to need to have a doctor who's going to have to take a look. And so all these people now have their paychecks coming from the theft of this child. And then you also have the foster parents who also make money too. And they get their so much a month for this child. So this is purely, not purely because a lot of it's religious, this is a money-making business. And the people in it are as vicious as you can imagine. They're not nice, but they can look nice. It's real easy to look nice. If you're not in the house of Yahweh, you're probably a vicious person, whether you like it or not. And you need to admit it. You're probably a vicious person, because you're not doing anything to prevent that in your life. You're not doing anything to prevent that. You have no training. Your mind is just like a sail in the wind, fluttering in every direction, just with all the different influences. And the world and the television want you to be vicious, and because you watch them, you're vicious. And that's that simple. And these people in these powerful positions see nothing wrong with taking a child from the parents to make 20, 30 grand. They see nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Because that's where their mind is. That's where their desire is. And now they're getting a little bit caught. Not much. If the legal system was doing anything like it should in the media, they would be knocking on those doors every day giving us a CPS update on what was going on, at least every week. I've lived in towns where they've done things like that with much lesser scandals. Maybe one person involved in a possible bank fraud, and they just cover it ad nauseum because they didn't like this particular person. I mean, look at how they covered our little case that was a non-case. They covered it constantly. And here we have, this is the very thing that their constitutional free speech is supposed to protect. It's supposed to protect journalistic efforts at exposing corruption of media. That's why it's there. That's one of the main reasons. It's there for us, of course. But in terms of its political purposes, it's so that the media uncovers corruption in government. They're not doing that. But if you want to know who won in Baird versus Clyde in the football game, they will tell you every single night who did, every single night. Without exception, they'll find a game for you, and they'll show these same people who can't play football for nothing running around, and now they've got video cameras that almost make it look professional, and no one cares. I don't know if there's anyone that cares except for one child's parent who cares what these non-athletes are doing. They can't even play football, and I hope that insults them. There's no sense in playing football. And just think of the number of children that are killed on the way to football games. I don't know if you've noticed the number of car accidents lately in the Abelin area, but they're all wondering what's going on because so many children are dying in car accidents, teens. Well, part of this is because of the increase in the lack of self-control. But usually they're going to a dance or they're going to a football game. They're going to some place where they didn't even need to go in the first place. And they get killed, and they're saying, well, maybe it's because we raised the speed limit. You know, they got these experts saying, no, they weren't even on one of those roads. It's because they're doing something they shouldn't even be doing. Football kills. All of these things kill, and they kill in various ways. 99, she's in hope of guiding mankind into this mass destruction. See, Satan wants this. She wants this in you. And if you notice verse 29 of Matthew 24, he shows the war is going to be in heaven also. We have a lot of equipment up there. I don't know what it consists of. Everyone seems to have satellites, or a lot of the nations have satellites. And of course, even North Korea is getting a satellite up there. You know, I don't blame them, these people, because they don't have the solution. They don't know what the solution is. All they see is this big power lying to them all the time. And I think it's a common thing that says they hate us for our freedom. And that's a real common saying, that these people hate us for our freedom. And as Pastor has said, no, they don't hate us for our freedom. They hate us because we're dropping bombs on their homes. That's why they hate us. You'd hate them too. And the first thing you'd think is, okay, we'll do what you want. And then they drop another bomb on your house. So after a while you say, no, we're not doing what you want. Stop building that bomb. We're not stopping building the bomb. We're going to build this bomb until we destroy you, because we've gotten to the point where we want to die to kill others. That's the level of hate that it gets to. That's the exact opposite of Yeshua Messiah. And you can't stop someone like that. You cannot stop someone who wants to die to kill others. They will succeed. Even though, I mean, it's kind of like Pastor says, they'll look right in the camera not knowing they're on the camera. They'll steal a credit card and buy something and think they've committed the perfect crime. Well, what are they doing with the satellites, and what do they intend to do with those satellites? He says in Matthew 24:29, immediately, but after the tribulation of those days will the sun be darkened, and the moon will not give her light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heaven will be shaken. This is this big thing that this girl here in Russia got caught up in. There was a small version of it, but deadly enough for them and their whole family. They will be shaken. You should take pictures, look at some of the pictures of that time period. They had people rotting in the streets. They didn't even have the ability to do anything with those people. And they have pictures of a guy, he's rotting in the street. I don't know who did this, with some woman took a picture. Next day, same guy, suit coat's missing. So next day, pants are missing. Next day, and she went all the way down till the guy was a rotting corpse lying in the street, because she wanted to get across the point. This is how bad it's gotten. And she was talking about how they're eating cats. But that's what we're looking at. We're looking at much worse than that. The siege of Leningrad was a small sample of what we're in for. And it's what you're going to experience personally to your death if you don't listen to the House of Yahweh now. The time for playing games, for listening into the lies of the Catholic Church is over. Everyone should realize that the Catholic Church, the Pope, is a big phony. He's a big phony homosexual who promotes the breaking of Yahweh's laws while pretending to be holy. He doesn't care about anyone but himself, and it's the same thing with the whole group of them. Stop supporting them. Come to the house of Yahweh. Take a stand that matters. Stand for righteousness. Don't support the breaking of Yahweh's laws. Do not support war. Come here. If they don't have any soldiers, they can't fight the war. It's that simple. If they don't have any soldiers, they don't have anyone to pay them, they can't fight the war. Just come to the house of Yahweh. They'll be shaken but not destroyed, because Yahweh Himself, this is His plan. He is governing it, and will only allow it to go a certain distance. And He will. And even this slander against us is for a purpose. It's so that the plan will come to its full fruition, so that people will not be converted before they're supposed to be. So don't get discouraged. Your place in the kingdom is incredibly magnificent, beyond anything you can imagine, beyond anything that we can comprehend, and you don't want to miss out on it. So put forth all of your effort to become fully perfect as Yeshua Messiah and to serve others, because that is the motivation that will keep you from becoming like the gods of this world. So now at this time, let's say closing prayer. Father Yahweh, this is Kwanzaa Fine, the the last day's witnesses, Roh Hawkins, your son, our high priest, Yeshua Messiah, along with the great men of your class, thanking you, Father, for this opportunity that you have given us, this tremendous knowledge, this whole new way of thinking that is far superior to that of the world and opposite to it, that will bring light to the world, life, eternal abundance, abundant living, eternal joy, and in ways that we cannot even possibly imagine at this time. We do pray, Father, to overcome our shortcomings, to overcome temptations of the world, this carnal mind that has been put into us by the influences of the world, to not have any more influences, to watch for that, and to bring ourselves to the point where we only want to serve others by keeping the laws and by following the last day's witnesses, Roh Hawkins. In Yeshua Messiah's name, hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise Yahweh.